Time now for Money, Power, Politics. And business leaders are beginning, I'm going to say beginning, to speak out after the killing of Alex Preddy, the second fatal shooting by federal immigration agents. More than 60 Minnesota-based businesses, including Target, Best Buy, United Health, signed an open letter calling for, quote, immediate de-escalation of tensions for state, local, and federal officials to work together to find real solutions. I'm going to go out on a limb that's bland at best. That letter was posted on the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce site. Joining me now to discuss, former Wall Street banker turned journalist, my friend Bill Cohen. He's a founding partner of Puck, and David Gura, correspondent for Bloomberg and host of the Big Take podcast. All right, David, yes, I'm glad that we are now hearing from business leaders, but that is after thousands and thousands of extraordinary, ordinary Americans, people of Minnesota, have stood out in the cold for weeks now. So, yes, 60 of these companies said, please, let's de-escalate. And they said that, 20 hours after some of the even bigger CEOs, I'm looking at you, Tim Cook, were at the White House Saturday night for a movie screening of Melania's documentary, hours after Alex Preddy was killed.
I think you're right, Steph, to highlight the blandness of this statement. We should talk about the way in which it's come together, how it's being presented here. They're doing it under the cover or the aegis of the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. So these companies don't apparently feel like they can come out individually, give a statement that might be more specific, might speak more specifically about what's happened in Minnesota, yes, over the last week, but over the last few months. And I think it's a marked contrast to what we saw certainly back in 2020 after the killing of George Floyd. You had companies did come out in that way, companies in Minnesota. I think of Target as a big one. And I think it speaks to the moment that we're in right now. There has been an extreme level of caution among executives, an extreme level of caution that's kind of been enabled or encouraged by this administration. We've talked a number of times just about the perils of speaking out and what retribution or retaliation you might get from the White House in this moment. So I think there are a lot of executives who've become kind of happily accustomed to that in this environment. Why speak out if it's going to lead to something bad, if it's going to invite blowback on a company? And again, this environment, the one that we're in right now, is really encouraging them to stay silent more than speak out.
And I get that, Bill. It's a very tricky needle to thread. Just look at last week. Jamie Dimon, who is hardly a woke CEO, was rightfully critical of immigration policies, was honest about the way tariffs work. And Trump turns around and slaps him and J.P. Morgan with a $5 billion lawsuit. However, we're talking about speaking out after the second American citizen was killed in the last 3 weeks, and the American people are saying this doesn't work for us. I get that they don't want to get on the wrong side of the president, but what about getting on the wrong side of the American people and justice and decency and humanity?
Yeah, well, Stephanie, let's agree. It's long overdue that we are hearing from the CEOs, even if they've done it by collective action, even though they've done it sort of in a nameless, faceless way by posting it on a Chamber of Commerce website. But it is long, long overdue for CEOs, important people who have the wherewithal and the power to stand up to this president and his behavior, which is beyond the pale at this point. It's long overdue that they're doing this. And thank goodness that they are. And maybe this will start something, Stephanie, that is long overdue and that it needs to happen, that more CEOs on Wall Street will begin to speak out. CEOs, people who are hedge funds, multi-billionaires who have the money and the wherewithal to stand up to this guy will begin to do that. And by the way, on the Jamie Dimon front, Stephanie, and I'm sure you watched this closely as I did, in Davos, he gets slapped with this $5 billion lawsuit, even though he was extremely careful with what he said in Davos and basically didn't say anything except, I don't like tariffs. What more do you want me to say? So he should have been more forceful in Davos, and he wasn't. But nevertheless, he still got slapped with this lawsuit. So I do take David's point. It's a good one that everybody is running scared. So let's just give a little credit to these 60 CEOs who've joined together, however meekly, on this website and let it be known how they really feel. hopefully this
Bill,
will be a tidal wave of others doing the same thing.
You know I care about your health. Do not hold your breath, Bill, waiting around for hedge fund managers. When Bill Ackman in the last 24 hours tried to point the finger, why is this happening in Minnesota? Why? Because there's a surge of agents being sent there while there's not a surge of migrants moving there. At least not compared to states like Texas and Florida that resoundingly vote for Donald Trump. All right, new topic. The president is headed to Iowa tomorrow for a speech on the economy. This state, of course, borders Minnesota, where the immigration crackdowns are happening. And it's coming right after a New York Times poll is showing that many Americans believe that a middle-class lifestyle is out of reach. David, what is at stake for the president tomorrow? What is he likely going to say in Iowa? What can he say, whether it's about the economy or the state of the country?
Well, this is a moment when his advisors clearly want him to talk about this issue of affordability that he has described as a canard a number of times. He doesn't seem to recognize it as being one that's really resonant with a lot of Americans. And you look at that New York Times Siena College poll, what stands out to me is again, evidence of this huge disconnect between the haves and have-nots in this country, especially when you look at generational kind of optimism about the economy. There was so much pessimism in the results of this survey. So look, this is another opportunity for the president to go and try to make his case for what he's done and what he intends to do going forward here. But he's had numerous opportunities to do this. We were talking about Davos just a few minutes ago. That speech that he gave there was supposed to be a speech about housing policy. Yes, a victory lap as he rounded the first year of his second term, but also a moment to talk about domestic policies. And he seemingly avoided talking about it altogether. So I'll be listening, of course, to what he has to say here. But it seems like from this polling and others, the salient issue going into the midterms is going to be this one of sort of who has opportunities in this country. We're not talking about abstract issues here. We're talking about people who feel pessimistic about housing and education and healthcare, the fundamental things in all of our lives, feeling as though they're unattainable right now, feeling as though achieving a middle-class status in this country is something that is going to be fewer and far between. And that's should be devastating, not just for this president and for the Republican Party, but for everybody here looking at those data, seeing how grim the situation seems to be when it comes to sentiment.
Bill, I only have 30 seconds left. Honestly, what is he going to say in Iowa? Hope you guys like the Farm Aid bill I had to put out there because you're getting it in the ear because of the tariffs I implemented?
Stephanie, I wouldn't want to be Donald Trump going to Iowa and trying to sell his economic policies that he's implemented in the last year. They're disastrous. These tariffs have hurt the American people in their pocketbooks day after day after day. He boasts about all the swelling coffers that these tariffs have brought in, but let's face it, it's coming out of the pocketbooks of the American people. It's a very tough case for him to try to make. I wouldn't want to do it if I were him. He can't be shamed, of course, so he's just going to blither away and he won't even notice probably that people aren't happy. But, good luck to him. Good luck trying to make this case.